Hello and welcome to Extra Hours as part of the Office Hours Global network. We're here to chat about all things media creation and production, live event production and online events and all those fun things. We've assembled a couple of people from around the world. My name is Grant Whitehead. I sit in Adelaide, South Australia. And just down the road from me a little bit is Carl Asmussen. Hello, Carl. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing?
We're doing very well. And then we get over into the States. So then we go up the top in Seattle, Washington. We have Guy Cochran. Hello, Guy.
Good evening from Seattle.
Yeah, it's a little cool there. We normally do a little weather check-in.
Yeah, about 23 degrees out, and I'll walk the dogs after this, and I got to put on my face mask and my hat and the gloves, and wow. It's a little nippy out there.
It's about 23 degrees here as well, but Celsius, and so it's sort of it's quite a bit different. So
different vibes.
And then moving across down central. It's not quite central, not really. Well, we can get across there a little bit into Oklahoma. Hello, Tucker Dragoo. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, I'm well. Good afternoon, evening, morning. It is currently 39 Fahrenheit, which is balmy 4 Celsius.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We had yesterday. It was 30. I don't know what we got to, 37. So that's just over 100. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good and warm.
That's warm. Yeah. And then over a little bit more, we have Paul Walhus in Austin. Are you actually in Austin, Texas?
I'm actually in Hot Springs tonight. I'm in the lower Midwest, I guess we'll call it.
You keep moving around.
Yeah, I'm not that far from Tucker. He's over in Oklahoma. Tucker's wearing a great hat tonight. I like that hat.
And just because it's called Hot Springs, it doesn't actually mean it's hot, right? Like, what's the temperature there at the moment?
I think it's probably upper 30s, somewhere in there.
All right. What happens when we talk about temperature at the start of the show is it shows how geographically diverse we are. So that's what happens. In Marin County, Alex Lindsay, weather check-in.
It's a balmy 54, which is higher than my record experience Celsius. My highest Celsius record that I've ever been in is 48. So,
yeah, okay.
And it was hot. It was Battambang, Cambodia. We had to do a live event there, and we couldn't turn the project. We had 2 big Barco projectors, and we couldn't turn them on until 6 o'clock in the evening because it was just too hot to run them. Like it was too much. So anyway, that's the most I've experienced so far. So I spent most of it in my hotel room, just going, I hope this goes away by tonight.
I know. So, when can we turn the oven off?
Yeah, exactly. It did feel like it. It felt like you're especially when you're walking on the pavement. You know, the pavement felt like it was. That's when you feel that heat when you open an oven. The pavement feels like you're walking on that. So, yeah.
There's across the road from my neighbor is the chief of the country fire service for South Australia, and so it's actually he's a good guy to have as a neighbor. Firstly, it means that I chose a good street to be in because of forest fires or bushfires, as we call them here. We're in a good spot. I figure that if the chief of the fire service is on the same street, it must be okay. But I was talking with him, and all the projections are like we're going to see 50 degrees Celsius, in the not too distant future. Like it's getting there. So
gonna get warm.
That's just nuts. Yeah. But another interesting thing too was, and this is what happens when you work on all sorts of different events where you sit in the back of the room and you hear all things. For 20 years, I've been doing an event called TreeNet, which is all about street tree management. So council people from all over Australia and New Zealand come together and they talk about street trees. And what's amazing is they show the difference that happens in different suburbs, different areas and different city areas, and the temperature and the difference between a city with lots of greenery, lots of trees, lots of street trees, versus these new, development areas that have very little greenery, very few trees, and their houses are close together and they don't have eaves and they have big, air conditioners hanging out the back of them. They can see 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius difference in one suburb to another suburb. Like over this road, it's hotter than this road because of the trees and things that are in there and the greenery that is around. Fascinating stuff when you start looking at it.
One of the things I love about what we do is that we stream all these things for people and learn all these things about things. And there's so many parts of my job over the last many years that like I did legal animation, which was, you do, and I stuck with what's called demonstrative evidence. So it's just to set up the conversation for a legal. So I didn't have to do evidentiary. Evidentiary is pain because you have to have engineers and you have to prove everything that you put in it. Demonstrative is like, here's how plumes work. Here's how salmon go do their thing. Here's how a laser works. Like it's not, and it's fun, but you would get to sit down and like we did one that was around genetics. And I got to sit down with like one of the world experts in genetics, and he explained, like, it's like I got my own little, like he teaches at one of the best colleges in the world, and he's sitting there. I get my own private lesson, and I get to come back and meet with him once a week to learn about how RNA works and DNA works. It's pretty awesome. it was and so I think that, but like what you're talking about, when we do these events, we do all these different events, and you learn about trees. I've learned about tuna. I know more about tuna fishing than you can possibly imagine, because I've done a bunch of videos on it and done events. So, but I think that it's a real gift, when you get to work on all these events, because you get to learn about a whole bunch of random things that make you the ultimate Cliff Clavin. You don't know who Cliff is, do you?
No, I've heard.
He just stepped right over that. Cheers. It's a little known fact that
one of the first events that I did when I was just doing AV, I was based in a hotel, was for a frailty conference, and so all medical, and so the organizer handed me a VHS cassette and said, "Are you at all squeamish? Like at all?" Because we've had lots of our technicians faint when they're playing these videos out, and I said, no, it's all good. And so I played it. And of course there was a little bit of, like, you just don't quite know what you're going to see, and you learn all these things. But it was pretty amazing. I think, Guy, you would have been on the end of a camera in some interesting places.
Concerts mostly. I mean, being out in these hot venues with sweaty people getting up on my back and having to run across stages with the page pulling cable out to me and holding in awkward positions underneath drummers and having the comms in my ear say, "Hold that position." And you're like, "Do you know how contorted I am right now to get this shot?" And they're like, "Hold." Yeah, I could get into some weird predicaments.
Tucker, have you've been into some interesting topics, have you, with your work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some of the really interesting ones that I remember are like doing brownfield reclamation events where like they're talking about, converting lands that have been, had heavy industry on them and trying to get them converted back and make them, usable and livable again. Were some of them, and I definitely share some of your experiences with the medical and the squeamish, those things. I definitely early on did plenty of that. So, yep.
Carl, you do lots of still photography.
That's right. So
lots of
I do a lot of
parties
large events, though. Yeah, so large events. So some events, people may be under 25. A lot of events maybe where people are a lot over. It's usually the birthdays get interesting. So I do a lot of 21st, but I also do a lot of 50th and a lot of first birthdays. So first birthdays are really interesting because they're really just an adult party where the kids are just covered in cake and face paint. But so first birthday parties are really interesting because they're always different, and 50th birthday parties are really interesting as well. 21st all kind of meld into each other; they're all very similar. But yeah, birthday parties are all quite unique. Whereas large events, large corporate events, and large social events where you got like 200, 300, 400 people, they all kind of end up the same. They may start different, but they all end up the same. Generally, the awards, when they're giving out awards at these kind of events, that's where it gets quite interesting because some of them are quite comical. But yeah.
There must be times you walk past things and go, oh, I better not take any photos of that. Oh, can't take photos of that.
Literally, I have an event coming up in a couple of weeks where that will be the case. So yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right. Well, people that are familiar with officehours.global are logged into our Makana event for extra hours and are posting questions. And so if you would like to do that and you're not joined up, officehours.global/join. And you'll start getting some emails and you can see all the links there. But Guy, what have we got? Got a couple of questions there.
First one coming in from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. And he says, DeepSeek, what's up with that?
Yeah. Alex?
It's fascinating. Today was a fascinating day. A lot of stock went everywhere. So it was a very hectic day. DeepSeek is a Chinese startup that basically released they released an open source version of an AI model that took about 5% of what it normally takes everybody else to create this model that's working in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases as good or better than ChatGPT and some of the Anthropic models and so on and so forth. And it's a fascinating problem in the sense that what appears to have happened is that the United States put a bunch of restrictions about what kind of chips the Chinese could use, which forced them into a position where they figured out how to do it without all those boards, which has not been great for Nvidia. Nvidia dropped 16%, I think, today, because suddenly we may have enough boards right now for what we need if you start to go down that more efficient model. So I think that, and the Chinese did a bunch of things that made it much more efficient. And if it continues down that path, you could theoretically get some pretty incredible models with the capacity that we have right now. So it's a real the hardest pill is for Nvidia, where the demand for their boards may drop off. And the reality is that at some point someone was going to figure out how to do it more efficiently. I mean, we didn't feel like we could brute force this forever, and so because we were really just brute forcing, like everyone's going as fast as they possibly can. The only people that were pushed into this kind of constrained environment was the Chinese, because we wouldn't give them the chips. And we're seeing this oftentimes, this kind of distortion of things pop out that we don't unintended circumstances or unintended consequences from this idea that we're going to control something, and then it doesn't turn out that way. So, like for instance, we underfunded Ukraine and didn't give them what they needed, and it was one of the largest populations of engineers in the world, and we gave them an existential life and death threat, and then we didn't give them any resources. And what they figured out how to do is wage war in an entirely different way that will destabilize the whole world. Like they figured out how to deploy 2 pounds of explosives 10 miles for $600. And that there's a version of this in the future that means that you can never go to a sporting event again. So because we constrain those resources and specifically when you put engineers under enormous amounts of pressure, it turns out they get really creative. And we saw that in Ukraine. We're seeing that in China. And again, we just keep on making these same mistakes over and over again, in the sense that, there's a big argument about H1. I'm not going to get into politics of it, but H1B visa has built India. The fact that we restrict the number of people that can come to the United States means they have to stay at home, and we develop all these technologies overseas. And so this is just another version of this kind of constraining supply and having it pop out in a different way that may not be what we wanted.
Yeah, 100%. I heard Tim Cook defend, Apple doing a bunch of development and production and things in China. And one of the things that I hadn't heard before, he say, is just all the engineers, the number of high qualified engineers that can be accessed there versus what can be in
Well,
the
and
West.
and oftentimes it's a different kind of engineer too. So if you talk to folks that do these supply chains, the kind of engineers that come up with what Apple's going to do are actually more plentiful in the United States. The kind of engineers that figure out how to take what they came up with and turn it into a machinable part is much more plentiful in China. And so that's the part, and China may catch up and make both, but right now the ability to execute, and it's the sheer number of engineers, the sheer number of machinists that are, and the people who are building the pieces of it, the infrastructure of all the companies. Like, it's not one company in Shenzhen that makes, Foxconn is surrounded by lots and lots of little companies that are all supplying pieces that they need to make this happen. It's millions of people and thousands of companies that build an iPhone. And we say Foxconn, but there's this whole environment that sits right outside of Hong Kong, which I thought was interesting. When I finally looked at it on a map, I was like, oh, it's on the other side of the border, because that's where all the trade was going on. But if you talk to anyone, they're like, building that infrastructure in the United States is probably not going to happen anytime soon. And they're doing it in India and Brazil because they have to, and it's very slow and stuttering, and they're still taking tons of the materials that are made in China and then sending them to India and then putting it together. It's not like they just are building it from the raw metal, in India. So it's a really complicated problem of where those things are. We are seeing Apple and many other companies, because of this increasing tension between the United States and China, many companies are trying to get out of China. But it's hard, and it's a hard thing to do. It's really interesting. I'm curious what we see, whether DeepSeek, this release of it, making it open source, was purposeful in a way of, basically undermining the United States economy. It's a bit of a atomic bomb for, right now they're saying they're not worried about it, but there are a lot of people that have said the amount of money put into AI, because you could get money, you could raise money in Silicon Valley if you just said AI, like, AI, here's $1 million, right? AI, here's $1 million. They said the drop in value of AI because of DeepSeek is potentially an existential threat to all of Silicon Valley, because they're so deep into AI, and suddenly it may have lost 20x value. Now some people say, well, we don't know yet. And that's true. And it does look like DeepSeek is sending a lot of it's an open source thing, so people can go in. If you take it as it is and just package it up and turn it on, it does look like it's sending an enormous amount of data back to China. So it is a little bit of a Trojan horse as well. But of course it's open source, so people feel like they can go through it and get rid of those hooks. But the hooks right now are putting all your information into China servers. So I probably wouldn't do anything mission critical in DeepSeek anytime soon.
Hey, Guy, you had some good little stats about it. Have you got that at hand?
I don't have it in front of me, but over the weekend I was working on a project with Jonas and Chirig, and Jonas had turned me on to T3.chat. And while we were going through it, he's like, yeah, and I like DeepSeek. And that was the first time I had seen it, was over the weekend. And 2 days later, the news drops, and I'm like, wow, because in this morning session, Ryan was saying that these LLMs couldn't do multi-page websites. And I was like, I just saw that. We were just doing it yesterday. And, or he said that on Sunday show. And I was like, that's not true. We were doing it. And so DeepSeek's already that far advanced ahead of the game, just like that. They're doing things that OpenAI cannot for a fraction of the cost. I think they've got 200 employees as opposed to OpenAI's 4,500 employees. They've got, I think it was 200 million in the assets in the budget versus 450 billion with OpenAI. So some of these stats, Peter Diamandis had sent out an email earlier today. Like, it's a historic day. Like, I was worried about the AI arms race before, and now I'm like, oh wow, like, code cracking, just things, all this stuff that we thought we had a leg up on the world, it just changed. It's a new day. Things
it hasn't been nearly pushed as hard as the other ones yet. So there's a couple of things, like, people have done things and go, okay, this is really great, but we still don't know, and again, there's huge security issues in the way that it's built right now. That and it's a fascinating thing. Like, I bought a radio. I had to buy another one. I bought a radio from Amazon, And when I put it in, it will not allow my phone. It's a Bluetooth AirPlay. Will not allow my phone. It's made out of China, of course. It's, you know, it was, I don't know, not cheap, not expensive, about $180 or whatever. My phone will not pair with it unless I set my contacts to share and turn hotspots on. Those two things, like, what would you possibly want with that? Like, literally, it's in a car radio, you know, like, you know, and it's a totally a Trojan horse, you know, like that it's completely. So I was like, I'm going to buy a radio that's much more low key. Like, I just want aux in. Thank you. I'm not going to keep on doing this. That's all I need, you know? And so, but it was, you know, that's the kind of, so this, you know, aggregation and using these models to understand us allows, you know, if you ever wanted to get into a cyber war, it may seem like innocuous problem, but having all that data means the big thing is I can send you an email that looks like an email from your friend that is, everything works. The English isn't bad. It's asking a reasonable question. It's trying to get you to do something, and that those phishing things get really effective if I have all that data, you know. And we're not the I mean, I'm not the target most likely, but if you're in the government, you know, it doesn't take very much to do a spear phishing project where you have that. If you talk to anyone who does red team, you know, I asked someone who works on red team for a lot of big companies, and I asked him, like, who's stopped you? And he goes, nobody ever stops us, just time. And I said, and is it like, what code do you use to get in? He's like, people code. he's like, oh, it's just people. You don't crack the software, you crack the people, you know. And he said that, you know, eventually someone will slip up and then you're in, you know. And that's the you know, that's the danger. If you wonder why China is constantly absorbing all of this data about us, and people are concerned about with TikTok and everything else, it's so that if they needed to use it, that larger net gives them an enormous amount of power to move ideas and things around and make it look like it was just coming from people that you knew.
Yeah, the little article that you sent through to me, Guy, was fascinating. Is it Peter Diamandis? Diamandis, is that right?
Diamantis, yeah.
Diamandis, yeah. He just said, I'll just read this introduction. I really like it. Netflix ate Blockbuster for lunch. Amazon decimated all of retail, and Uber and Zoom reinvented transport. The disruption and reinvention of every industry is rapidly becoming the new normal. This week, a small open source player out of China called DeepSeek is disrupting AI giants OpenAI and Nvidia. But this is just the beginning. Yep.
I just want to underline what he just put in there is this, each one of those was an artificial constraint that created an environment in which disruption occurred. So with Blockbuster, they're charging you a ton of money to be late, and one person didn't like it. like it really came down to, you know, that there was just somebody who's like, I'm tired of paying for these things, and that created the seed of Netflix, right? Is I'm tired of paying for all these late fees in Uber and everything else. I mean, taxi is practically the mafia in most cities. You know, there's just so much control to limit the number of taxis, to limit what's going on. The service was so bad. You know, it was horrible in almost every city, which created this control, created this environment in which Uber flourished, right? You know, that you suddenly were freed from that thing. You know, I think Amazon's more complicated, but I think that it was still, you know, what Bezos said a long time ago is that your margin is my opportunity. You know, and he, you know, and he just looked at how do we make all of that, you know, more efficient. You know, and that's the, you know.
Yeah, that's what I love about this group as well is that, you know, back in the late 90s when DV hit the scene, when I went to NAB, there was helicopters and satellite dishes, and it was all big, heavy iron and, you know, guys in suits, and it was just a totally different world. And now with this democratization that's occurred, it's changed the game. And now I think we're about to see it again, even in our world where we're doing live events and whatnot. The stuff that Tucker first showed us in the cloud way back with AWS, so it's like, oh, I don't have to buy that $2,000 computer. oh, I can just borrow it for $1.50. Like that to me was a game changer because I was like, I need 3 of those computers, and now I'm like $4.50 an hour instead of $6,000 out of my pocket. So I love this world that we're living in right now, and I love this group of here we're moving the ball forward, and I'm excited about this stuff that we can do with these tools and this energy and these ideas. Because you're right, Alex, it's just somebody held their shoe over us and squashed us down, and it's like, we're coming out, man, we're coming out, and all we need is some ideas and the right tools, and we're going to flourish. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think I heard it said about Uber that they're not necessarily faster than taxis, but the difference is that the insight into the data is knowing how far away the car is for you makes all the difference. So
not having to hail a cab.
You're not nervous. Yeah.
Not having to do the.
There's those key elements. The technology just made the whole thing so much more relaxed than the anxiety of, is this taxi even coming? How long is it going to be? All of that.
And the thing is it's the other thing is you never felt like you're going to get screwed by Uber has data, like the Uber driver can't really can't do anything that's predatory without Uber, nailing them for it and not paying them for it. So they're gonna follow the way that the Uber map gave it to them. So you don't feel like you're getting run around. I remember taking one, I was really tired and I couldn't get an Uber. So I just took a cab in Baltimore. And by the time I got to the airport, I don't know what he had done. I'd fallen asleep, like trying to get, it was just a late night. And I was $350, like for something that should have been $40, and I was just like, okay, well, that's the last taxi. Like, it was one of those, like the last taxi ride I took in a very, very long time, just because I was, and I was like, that's why I'm on Uber. But the ability to use your credit card easily without having to go through the whole slot and do all the other things, all of those, it's all of it. At first it was, to your point, it was just that you knew what was there. And when we first started using Uber, it was black car. It just looked nice. I mean, I remember my first 5 times using Uber, I was in Washington, D.C. I was having a lunch with someone who used to work at the White House, and I was having, and then we were like, oh, I got to go. My car's here. And I got up and got into a black car and drove away, and it felt good. Like it felt like, it's better than getting into a taxi. And of course, now it's just, you get into somebody's Prius, but it's.
Oh, Watson, I need my
exactly.
My car just arrived. Yes, here we go. Yeah. Thank you. Let me just finish this because I really like this. It said this is just the beginning. The coming industry disruptions will accelerate fast and furiously on the heels of AI, AGI, and ultimately digital superintelligence. First the tech players, next healthcare, then financial services, and education will be reinvented. Get ready for the roaring 20s. They are here. Oh, great analysis of where we're at. I think it is dramatically changing.
I was talking, I think I don't know if I talked about this. I never know, but I'm always self-conscious when I'm on a show with Grant that I've told the story before. So I don't know if I've told the story before, but I was talking to the
greatest hits.
I don't know if this is real time.
I don't want to hear new songs. I want to hear your old songs.
Exactly. So I was talking, I think I talked about, I know I've talked about it on some of the shows, but when you think about education, the amount of impact that this is going to have, because there's so many places where the student just needs really like real-time input on what they're doing and guidance and everything else. And it can be total, and they need a teacher to ask questions and have a conversation at times. But the amount the teacher can do, when I taught at San Francisco State, I was teaching visual effects and I was working on Star Wars. So I was like, I'm going to show these teachers how this actually works. I'm working on, like, my day job is Star Wars, and I was all arrogant. I got in there and just ground into the ground, and it was because every question slow, it was the slowest person was not the same person. It was this person doesn't understand this, and this doesn't understand that, and this person doesn't understand that. And before you know it, you got through 1/10 of what you thought you're going to get through that night, And so I just realized I just had a whole different respect for teachers. But nowadays, I had to do a pretty complex pipeline in Resolve, and I just sat there with ChatGPT. How do I do this? 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 And I set up all the bus structures and everything else, and it was all just following the instructions from ChatGPT. And and I was talking to an education consultant. This is where I might have said this before, where they were talking about reading, and you can argue that the only thing that school really has to do is make sure that you can read. And 30% of the students in the United States leave high school without being functionally literate. And that's your only job. Like, the math is important. Reading is really important because it's how you how you access all the other information. It's the key. So students have to leave with what we would call a Lexile score of about 1200 minimum. Like that's 1200 to 1400 Lexile score is where they have to leave so they can be functional in the world. And that's not happening right now. And the consultant said, what we're working on right now, or what people are working on right now, is a AI system that asks a child at 6 or 7, what would you like to learn? They can learn about, I want to learn about horses. I want to learn about astronauts. I want to learn about whatever we're interested in when we're 6 years old, right? And it starts to give them something in, let's say, a Lexile 100, level. And then when it's done, it gives them a little quiz that was based on what it just told them. Do you remember how many of this and everything else? And it's testing, did they read it and understand what they saw? And the next time they ask about anything they're interested in, it's just slightly harder, and slightly harder. And it just keeps on making the words get slowly bigger, and the sentences get a little longer, and the concepts become more complex. And if you want to see that as an example, you can go to ChatGPT and say, tell me about something with a Lexile score. Answer me in a Lexile score of 300, and it'll answer it. Answer me that in the Lexile score of 1600, and it'll answer that. Just look at the two different ones, right? And so, but it's constantly testing the student. And he said, when that's fully functional, most kids will hit 1200 Lexile by the time they're 10. because it's a constant interaction with them and constantly growing with them at the speed at which they're going. And it's constantly giving the teacher feedback. So the teacher can sit there and go, oh, this student is having trouble. Like, this student can't read. Now the teacher spends most of their time dealing with the exceptional students that are outstripping the AI, or the students that are still falling through the cracks. And for most of the students in the middle, they don't need anything other than just constant, like, they'll be in conversations, but they don't need to have as much hands-on interaction with the teachers, and I think they'll still get those conversations, but I think that when you multiply that to science, math, everything, I think that it's going to transform the way we think about education, and it, I don't know what jobs AI will replace, but we're going to end up with a much more educated population if we embrace it. If we don't, then everyone's going to get replaced by the AI. But I think there's an opportunity for a lot of people to learn become much more functional, which I think is necessary as we go into the future.
Totally agree. I really liked John's quote from last week when he said that AI is not going to take your job. I'm not going to say it as well now. It's not going to take your job. As in, now I don't even know what it was. He said, you will only lose your job if you're not using AI. That's one surefire way to be losing your job, is to be not engaging with it.
Yeah.
John, you're going to have to write the quote, and you said it so eloquently, and I didn't. All right, next question.
Next one's in from Pedro Gonzalez in Washington, D.C., and he asks, have you seen this retro mod for the M4 Mac Mini? Will it make it 20% faster? And he's got a link here for colorware.com.
Carl?
So I looked at this particular link. It's okay to have these kind of retro things. Just be wary of this particular one. They do say it up front on this website that you lose your warranty with Apple. So there is no warranty with Apple. You're buying a second-hand product if you buy from this website. So that's the only thing you want to be careful of. They do put it in black and white on the website. That is exactly what's happening here. It'd be nice if they had a kit or like a basic 3D printed enclosure that you could put the Mac Mini in. So a beige box. That'd be really nice, actually, a beige box with a rainbow logo. But this one, it seems to be they're using a sticker, a heat transform sticker, or if they wanted to go fully to town, they'll disassemble the Mac. They'd put the aluminium into anodization and then take it out, but I doubt they're doing. And unfortunately, the only thing they have on the website is renders, so we actually don't know what they're actually doing, if they're doing stickers or if they're doing anodization, which I doubt they're doing anodization, but do be mindful of warranty. So that's the only thing. So essentially, you're buying a second-hand Mac with this particular service.
Paul?
Yeah, I saw that, and it reminded me of the color, and the colorful logo reminded me of my old Apple II. Maybe I could take my Mac M1 Mini, and that Apple II had a case you could just pop off, put it in there, put the cover back on, and you've got a retro M1 Mini and an Apple II.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, that the warranty thing is a big deal, and I think that it's one of the strengths of Apple gear. Having lived in America for a few years and I've bought equipment, I bought Apple gear both in Australia and took it back in America and vice versa, and it's just no issue. And I just don't know many companies that you could do that with. The fact that I could just walk into an Apple store anywhere in the world with the gear that I bought anywhere in the world and have the same level of service is pretty amazing. So to lose that just because the look of the Mac Mini is cool, yeah, I'm not loving that. I agree with you, Carla. Yeah, ideally it was some sort of decal or something that you put over the top of it, but it was still yours. So anyway, next question.
Next one's coming in from Zach Jeffers, and he asks, I'm venturing out to a week-long event. We'll be doing a remote production in AWS from the middle of nowhere. What is your minimum mobile production fly kit? Displays, controls, resources?
Good question for this panel. Tucker?
Yeah, I'm not sure what all you're doing as far as if you're just going to be somewhere remote and be controlling the AWS instances. I'll kind of take it from the control side. So always just, use your Stream Decks. Stream Deck Studio is a good option. I would make sure you've got a good mobile internet option, preferably with a couple of different sources. I would be using probably Starlink in addition to cell-based services. I'd have those with a PEP link connected back to the AWS infrastructure. We've just recently started working with these really fun boxes, these H200s, that are basically little set-top boxes that we're able to get extremely low latency and very, very well-tuned multi-views out of. So I would be using a PEP link to feed internet to that and to probably my Stream Deck Studio. I carry 2 of these touchscreen monitors with me. And the thing that I really like about them is, one, they've got a stand built in, which is super handy. They are full-size HDMI and USB-C powered, so that's super, super helpful. And let's see what else is nearby that would be in that kit. A nice set of Sonys, because monitoring is important. Let's see here. Speaking of Sony, I would bring a good color accurate monitor. So there you go. There's kind of my base kit. Laptop wise, I use a Lenovo P1 with an RTX A4500 in it, and then some good laptop stands to make sure that guy doesn't overheat. So there you go. There's my kit.
That's cool. What's the H200? What is that box?
It's a set-top box that's a super low latency set-top box, and it'll decode AV1, VP9. It'll decode lots and lots of really high quality signals. We just did a test actually today with it using Nimble to feed it, and we were getting about 200 milliseconds of latency and a very, very good, it's still low bandwidth from what we were using. We were testing like minimal bandwidth. I think we were at 900 kilobit per second, 1080p, 30 frames per second, and it looked very, very good. Like you could absolutely cut a show with it.
Wow. Yeah. How would you compare that to, kind of doing other WebRTC things, or, like some of the other multi-views that you've got and stuff like that you do on a computer?
Yeah, the thing that we're looking at this specifically for is breaking the multi-view away from the desktop to free the desktop up for other activities, and also just from a redundancy standpoint, having something that's just a piece of hardware, like ideally you've got the PepLink feeding the Stream Deck Studio. Stream Deck Studio has a regular Stream Deck connected. Those don't need Companion running on your computer. Those can connect to Companion that's back in the AWS. Same thing for the multi-views. So at that point, you've got all of your kind of control layer, or at least the first option for control layer is all off of your computer. So it's all its own hardware-based solutions. And then your computer is there as a secondary. So you still have multi-viewers available. You still have the touch screen with Companion buttons and things like that available. So it's just kind of separating the things out.
Very cool. Carl?
So the one thing I would speak to is power. So if you're going to be remote, bringing a UPS. So EcoFlow, German company, which pretty much sells worldwide, have just released their third generation of products. They're just hitting the market, I believe, outside of Europe now. So I believe North America, you can get them, and they have an introductory special, so they're a little bit cheap at the moment. So the interesting thing is their Delta, which is their more higher end series, which starts at around $500 and goes off. It's very cool, but all their Delta 3 series, so it's important that I specify that it's the third generation that has this feature. So all the Deltas have UPS now. So they're all UPS, where this was not true with the second generation and first generation. So I need to be clear about that. So you'll find a lot of specials on the earlier generations. So be careful, they don't have UPS functionality. But the third generation does, and also the River. So the River is a more affordable, below $500 series. And actually they're kind of below $300 at the moment. And the River, there's two Rivers. There's a kind of the basic River, which has UPS, but it's UPS for mechanical devices, I would say, not digital devices. And then their River Plus, which is really sweet spot at the moment, which is around $250, depending on where you get it from. So this has full UPS, so it's a sub 10 milliseconds, so it meets all UPS requirements for digital, like computers and stuff. So I would, if you're doing a fly pack, one of these now, well, see, this is the thing. If you're flying, you wouldn't be able to get one of these on a plane. So that's another thing I need to caveat here, because they're over 100 watt hours. So over 99 watt hours. So I need to say that as just to make sure that you don't try to get one of these on a plane, because you won't be able to get it on a plane, because these are usually 200 to 300 watt hours. But if you can get there by road, or you can rent one of these, or, as I said, these are $200, you can buy one of these for the event. So now we actually have LPO, not sealed lead acid batteries, which is what nearly all UPSs up till this particular generation. I'm sure other manufacturers will come online, like Jackery and stuff. They will start copying this feature, hopefully. So therefore, it just becomes more widespread amongst these LPO backup batteries. But the fact they've now got the circuitry in the inverter, so this is extra stuff in the inverter. That's why it's not available on the second or the first generation of these. So they're actually putting in the circuitry, which is essentially just large capacitors that will hold the charge while it switches over from AC to DC. That's essentially what it is. And it can do it in sub 10 milliseconds, which that means it's good for digital stuff. You need to be aware of that. But as I said, the base River has 20 milliseconds. And some of the older version 2 had an EPS. So an EPS is essentially for like a CPAP machine. If you're asleep at night, if you lose power, you want your CPAP to stay on, that can be like 30 milliseconds. So that's called emergency backup power, so EPS. But these ones are UPS. Now they do have the Ultra. I won't get into the whole thing. That's online power, which means it's zero. It's always covered, but I won't get into that. But as I said, be careful if you're flying, but power. So backup power, UPS power. Now that we have LPO batteries with UPS, we can forego SLA, because you can't fly with SLA. So SLAs cannot really go into a plane. These can't fly into a plane because they're too big. But the big difference here is you could run your backup power with these now, especially with the Delta. You can have 1 to 2 hours with just a standard battery, and not the extra batteries you can add onto these systems, of course. But yeah, so now we can actually have backup power for hours, or we can run an entire event off backup, because these backup batteries can handle most digital equipment that we put into it. The only thing that it probably won't handle is lights. So once you start adding lights into these systems, okay, there are systems for that. As I said, the Ultra will handle lights, and the Ultra will handle the entire theater. So all the electricity required for an entire theater, for your entire show, the Ultra can handle, not a problem. But understand that's going to come at multiple thousands of dollars to do that. But it can do it. So there is options for it, and you can rent these. So you can always rent these kind of things as well. So, but my suggestion is just think about power, think about UPS, and now that LPO UPSs are available, think about those too. Because the one thing when you're on the road, you're always going to have to take what we call shore power. And the shore power you may have access to may be the vacuum cleaner outlet, and that vacuum cleaner outlet's had the actual outlet, the plug's been ripped sideways so many times, it may be very unreliable to someone just touching that cable. You may actually just get, the cord may come out. So always, whenever you're in like a room where you have to just use one of the outlets on the floor, one of the outlets on the wall, understand that a lot of vacuum cleaners go into them and a lot of cables get yanked out of those. So that's another thing you have to think about. And they won't change them. As long as they still work for the vacuum cleaners, they won't change those sockets. So that's another thing to think about as well.
I love how much you've talked about power, because it really is key, right? And the power and internet would be the two things we're really thinking mostly about. Guy?
Yeah, it depends how middle of the nowhere is, because if it's truly out there, I'm pretty lightweight, especially if I'm getting tossed around. It's just going to be my iPad with just me holding on to it. I know that Zach does these like Baja crazy things. So if you got me bouncing around, I'm not going to have all these monitors and cables and trip hazards and all that stuff. I'm just going to be on comms with somebody in a nice, comfy, air-conditioned office somewhere else, and I'm going to be talking to them, and they're going to be pushing all the buttons for me, because it doesn't make any sense to try and be cutting out in the middle of nowhere if you don't have to. I would just, you're remote anyway, just pass the torch to somebody else who's got the UPSs and all the power that they can eat. But yeah, my iPad and my MacBook Air both sip really just very minute bits of power. So I do have the EcoFlow, but I also have about 12 V-mount batteries that have USB-C. Plus, I've got a couple of the other, what do you call them, Anchor style batteries. So I haven't bought it yet, but Starlink Mini would be what I would get. I have these what do you call them, AT&T hotspots. So a couple of those hotspots, or I would just rent something like the Peplink or Keenan's solution with the, a lot of the stuff you don't have to own, you can just rent it. So like those power, the EcoFlows, some of the rental houses that do Aperture, they'll have those. So if you just call ahead and just get one reserved, they'll have it all charged up and ready to go when you land. So you don't have to buy that stuff. You can just rent it on location, and it's ready to go. As far as, again, displays and controls, it just depends on what your setup is. Do you have an actual table and the ability to set up properly and run cables? Because like Jeff Keithley went out to the desert with his Tesla and just sat in the back seat, and I got the same setup. I'm not a Tesla, but I have a minivan with the back seat. You could totally put up a desk back there with the EcoFlow, and then I've got a Honda E2000 generator. I could go for a week, easy, out there in the middle of nowhere. So it depends on what you're doing and how aggressive you want to be.
Yeah, Tucker, Guy, and I all worked on a project that was great, that we were able to do quite a few iterations of it, and we've spoken about it a bit before. But one of the things I realized is once we moved to cloud production, there was no reason, as Guy was alluding to, there's no reason to just have all of that control on one person in one location. So if you've got a centrally located cloud production system going, then you've got power and internet sorted, right? Like you've got all of that all worked out. You've got a central hub that is all sorted. So then why would you put all of the control all on one person and one, location? And that, I think that's one of the things that we got to that worked so well, is having redundant operators, like having some system in place that a bomb could go off on in one location and the show still goes on because the backup person takes over, the co-pilot, or like that's how we use the different terms, and they're in a totally different location, potentially different country as we were doing it, still controlling. And then of course you can also do redundant cloud production systems as well, right? So now you've got redundancy everywhere, and I think that then takes into account the health of the operators as well, right? Like there can just be, we think about all these technical things. What if you faint? What if something just goes on, you start throwing up or whatever it is? What's your backup strategy for that? And I think COVID helped a little bit in some of the in-person things that I was doing before COVID. We just realized the risk of sending one person to go and do an in-person event is so high, like there's so many risks involved on just that, whatever happens to that person. There's flights that cancel and the whatever it is, there's transport that your gear goes missing, all this stuff so we really just doubled down on, we send at least 2 people to our in-person events, no matter how small it is now. I mean, ideally we're not doing too many in-person events, but when we are, then we're having that redundancy in our personnel as well. That's often just something that we don't think about, and it's made really easy with cloud production to be able to just have another backup to be able to take over control. And budget's often an issue, but we
what's the price of failure?
Exactly. Alex had to step away, but if he was here, he'd be talking about what's the cost of failure. And you'd only do that once, and then you'd be like, okay, that's just not what we do now. And you've got to pay the extra to be able to have redundancy in our personnel. So anyway, great question. Next question.
Next one in from Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri, asks, San Diego suburb Chula Vista has approved an $85 million US dollars, 85K square foot, so 85,000 square foot state-of-the-art production facility. Comments? And he's got a link here to San Diego Magazine.
Carl?
So I truly believe we are in the golden age of television. And this is being shown just by how much investment is coming from Netflix, Amazon, as we see in this article. And this is a city council kind of moving out the way and allowing this to go forward as far as the legislation required from the local city council to have something like this built in their area. But this is really, if you are adjacent to production, or you're in production and you're in Southern California, this is really good news that there's more facilities being opened. But this is true all over the country and all over the world. So, production is increasing everywhere, simply because this is how we choose to be entertained now. This is how we choose to be distracted. We're going to the cinema less and less, and we're choosing to stream more and more. Now, stream doesn't mean we're just doing television, of course. We can also do movies via streaming. We can do lots of different content via streaming. But it's good to see that studio space is becoming such a premium that there is now a market for people to invest in more studio space for many more products to go onto streaming services. So it doesn't mean that this particular, for instance, a Netflix studio, it may be booked out predominantly by Netflix productions, but if they have a lull somewhere, they can rent it out to Amazon or anyone else. So it just means that productions are now going to have facilities. They don't have to go into ad hoc facilities, which may not be great. Sound stages are very expensive to actually invest in. So a true sound stage, which has like a 50 dB cut from the outside world, they're quite expensive to invest in, and you actually need to have them kind of permanently booked to pay for themselves. And so this is actually just really good for the industry itself. It's showing their strength. And if the industry does go through a lull 20, 30 years from now, we'll have a lot of facilities around for independent people to come in and make stuff in really good facilities, because they'll become cheaper because they're going to be totally booked out. So it's just good news all around, really.
Yeah. Alex?
I think the important thing in this press release is to be careful of reading. Like I work on a lot of press releases. You got to be careful of how things are hedged in the press release. So it said, Robert says he picked Chula Vista because the city has been eager to partner on other studios, putting in bids, not closing bids, putting in bids to build Netflix studio and Amazon headquarters. So they're part of, they're saying like, we're interested, but they haven't locked those bids. They put the bids in, but they haven't closed them. The reason I say that is that we don't see very many people building studios in California. So that like new studio production is pretty unusual in California. And that is because there's not enough incentives in California for most of the movie industry to build. So going to San Diego doesn't really save them a lot. It's actually, San Diego is pretty expensive to go to from LA because LA has all the infrastructure. So you're in the same state with the same lack of investment from the state when it comes to incentives, but without all the infrastructure that you have in LA. So it would be, I think that someone's got a big idea. I'm a little like, we'll see how this goes. It feels, like, cause there's some point where this, I think I agree with Carl that we are in the golden age of television, or what I would say streaming television. but we are in the golden age. Like, this is as good as it's going to get. So by the time this facility gets built, I'm not clear there'll be as many players left. So in a $89,000 structure, we're talking about designing and constructing. So this is going to be something that occurs 3 to 5 years from now is when this thing's going to open. And will the entertainment industry that's very quickly evolving still be in the same condition? Are all these streamers going to be able to, because we've already seen the streamers start to pull back. They're investing in less production. And when they invest in that production, a lot of it's out of the country or out of the state. Because of all again, there's a bunch of savings that happen in Eastern Europe and Canada and Australia and many other places that they're not getting in the United States, and definitely not in California, And so I think that's the challenge that a San Diego activation would have is, and again, you can obviously try to make it work. I think but that's what they have to run up against. And I think the other thing they're running up against is that I still think the most disruptive thing in the entertainment industry is YouTube. And I've said it, I think, almost every show, but it's just the fact that someone in Sydney or Melbourne can be interested in coloring books and make a solid living doing coloring books with her husband on YouTube should terrify every person in Hollywood. That people can do something that they're passionate about, and they're not living in a big mansion. They're just making a above average living, doing what they love to do, is incredibly disruptive. Because it just means that everybody, because there's so, like, I generally, we're watching X-Files right now as the family. So we're going through the entire X-Files. So 1 or 2 of those a week that we're watching. I just finished Silo, but outside of that, it's really hard to get me to watch anything other than YouTube. It's like I just watch, because there's so many weird verticals that I get interested in, and I just can. And there's so many videos, and I've talked about it before. I'm really into swimming videos right now because I'm horrible at freestyle, and trying to turn controlled drowning into laps. And when you look at these videos, though, the amount of production required to shoot all these folks talking about it underwater. You can put the little thing under to do the thing. They're not doing this by themselves. It's not like they're using a selfie stick while they're swimming. There's somebody like shooting the video and doing the thing, and there's hundreds and hundreds of different channels on that one thing, so I just find that to be fascinating and incredibly disruptive and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, you talk about all the different verticals that there is. Imagine if there's a show just talking about live production and media production.
Every day,
and
these
people
crazy
would meet every day.
Yeah, and sometimes they meet twice a day.
Why would they do that?
To spend an hour just answering questions about media. It's crazy.
That's crazy. Speaking of that.
What's the square footage of the total production facilities here? Let's see, this room's 12 by 12. What's yeah. All right, next question's coming in from Matt Cool in Montreal, Quebec, and he's asking, I'm having an issue with Poll Everywhere when using the PowerPoint plugin where the results page is overshooting the screen by about 30%. Anyone seen this?
Alex?
No, haven't seen it. Right. So I'm just sending it out we haven't seen it, but haven't used Poll Anywhere in this environment either. So we're just stating the facts here. I guess the question is if you're having this trouble, I get that you're using it inside of PowerPoint as a plugin. Have you tried it I think that their web display of that, is it still having problems, or is it just simply the plugin not reading that correctly?
Yeah. Tucker?
Yeah, that's what I'd be looking at is Poll Anywhere placing it on the canvas beyond one frame, or is a normal PowerPoint also not showing up properly? And in that case, I would look at your production pipeline downstream and just look and see where do you have overscan happening and how can you minimize that. So it's possibly a scalar issue or a capture issue, but otherwise, if it is specifically, if you put up a normal PowerPoint, hit F5, and if it's not edge to edge like you expect, then yeah, I would look into the production pipeline.
Yeah, that's great. So Poll Poll Anywhere, maybe it's a little known fact for some people, is that they do offer that it's a free plugin to bring websites into PowerPoint, and you can you can argue all the reasons not to do that, and there's some good ones. However, polling is one where you do want to get live data, and chances are you're just wanting to display it. You don't have a tech team to run it all for you. You've got a handful of slides, and then you want to see the poll results. What might not be clear is when you do use that PowerPoint plugin, you can overshoot the canvas, as in you can make the Poll Anywhere plugin any size you want on the slide. And so it may not be clear that it's overshooting the canvas size. And so you could have a look at that and see if it, make it smaller and see if that makes any difference. That's what I'd play around with.
That's what I was going to say. I would try and force it to 1920 by 1080 and then try it with the standard resolution, because if you have a funky size monitor, it might just be that it's not used to that, and so it's overshooting it because it doesn't know in that space where it's supposed to be. So I would go with a standard, force your display to be 1920 by 1080 and try it again and see what happens.
Yeah. And then, it's the other things is to make the background color of the slide a weird color. And so you can start to see exactly what's going on with that plugin, and make it smaller and then go out from there. All right, next question.
Next one in from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, asks, what cool things can you do with the XLR output on a Shure MV7 Plus microphone?
Carl?
So the good thing about this, because you've got the USB and the analog out via XLR, is you have flexibility. So you can run to two different systems simultaneously. You could use one as a backup. You could use one as for live stream feed and one for an in-house, front of house kind of feed if you're doing an audience. So there's lots of different things that gives you flexibility. It also gives you, again, a backup if that particular computer that may be attached to the USB goes down, reboots itself, does whatever. You can go out to another mixer that can go out to another computer. So essentially, it's really cool that you can actually do this with a lot of microphones now. They have this dual output. So there's a lot of USB microphones that have XLR that can do this. But you do need to kind of sit down before your event, before whatever it is you're doing, and just think about a redundant pipeline, which these can give you, which is really cool.
Yeah, agreed. Who else said? Alex.
I mean, the biggest thing is being able to get into a mixer or a mute. If I talk like I've got a hardware mute, that being able to have that control and not having to do it in software is kind of a big deal. And once you start getting a bunch of mics, I will say Shure has taken this about as far as they can go, which is that we now have a mixing station. You can attach a bunch of mics to the same computer, and they're pushing it about as far as it can go without building their own mixer. So eventually it feels like Shure is going to have to come up with their own mixer for their own mics or whatever. But right now they've pushed it about as far as once. But if you want to start really getting in there and being able to switch and for me, it's mostly mute. I can't be on at this point after 4 or 5 years of having a mute switch. It's so part of what I do at my desk. It'd be very hard for me to give that up. I don't want to. I watch people all the time in our show tapping on like, oh, I forgot to turn the mute on or off. The software mute is not the same.
It's not the same. I will say that I have been using a Stream Deck, and the keyboard shortcut on the Stream Deck is rock solid for me. So and I think that the sort of nearly 5 years or whatever I've been doing that on Zoom.
I think some people can pull it off. I think that, but it's just it's one of the number one problems we have in the show is someone who doesn't have the software mute on and off. And for me, and I wish that I do wish that there was a simpler, less expensive version than what I have, because I don't need all the things that I have in mine. Mine's got Dante and I've got it automatically mutes when I push for comms, and it does a bunch of other stuff to it. But the most important thing is that number one is you can't hear it click. So it's the physical ones. That's the problem with a lot of the physical ones is that you can hear them when you push them in. It has a light that if I look down when I go to tap on it, I can say, oh, my mic's open or my mic's closed, based on the light. And so I mean, those are the big things. And I just wish I could have something that was simpler, that was even a couple $100 instead of what I paid for mine. So.
That's fair enough. I do like particularly in Zoom, I like seeing when people's mics are muted and not, so having that indication is nice. And Mickey's saying as well, yeah, the keyboard shortcut, like Command Shift A. And I specifically run my Stream Deck using the native Stream Deck software, and then use I use for the other companion, I use that as a plugin. So the main thing that's running is just a keyboard shortcut. And for those that didn't know, you can, in Zoom, you can set the global shortcut so that it doesn't even need to be in focus for it to work, which is a nice thing. But getting back to Paul's question, something that I've been looking at, because Blue got one of these recently, and I'm really quite impressed with it, is the Rode Podcaster Video, which is like it's like a Rode Podcaster audio mixer and an ATEM built in to one. And what's nice about it is the 2 XLR inputs on it, as well as 4 HDMI and a couple of USB-C, so you can even plug in web cameras to it. You can plug in 2 webcams as inputs, as well as 4 HDMI and 2 XLR and balanced output and things as well. So when I think about like an ideal setup, I think about, having an XLR mic with something like that is then creating the pipeline, a video pipeline, with balanced audio in it as well. So that's the direction that I would go if I was replacing things. All right, next question.
Next one's coming in from Zach Jeffers in the Great Pacific Northwest, and he says, in show projection, whether podcast or on stage, etc., is always different than at mic check. What is your trick for getting talent to check gain at volumes? I usually try to demonstrate the world's worst walk-in impression with peaks and lows.
That's cool. Carl?
So there's generally so if you've got these kind of things where you've got talent sitting down doing your mic check first, and then you've got the talent coming back and doing the show, you're going to have a difference in energy level. So their energy level is going to be very different when they're in show than when they're doing the mic check. So this is something that, especially if it's just spoken, we notice it here sometimes. We get excited about certain subjects here in office hours, and we have to be careful of not going over, or we have someone in the background bringing down our mics. So your A1 does have to ride the faders a little bit. So this is the job of an A1, to be 100% mindful of 100% of the audio 100% of the time. That's what they're paid for. That's it. So it's really important that you have a good A1 who can notice that they may be too excited, or they may have pulled back a little bit from their microphone. So instead of 3 inches, they're now 6 inches. That's quite a big difference when it comes to the inverse square law, when it comes to the volume coming out of your mouth as far as sound. So you do want to think about these things. Another thing is, if you're in a live room and there's actually an audience, the audience will soak up the sound as well. So the audience will actually soak up a lot of the sound coming from your PA system than when you're in the empty room. The empty room will ring out at different frequencies as well. So there's lots of things that the A1 will need to be mindful of. But the person on stage, if it's a 2-person talking, like between ferns kind of thing, they may have sound a bit lackluster when the room is full of people. And this has mainly to do with the people being in there, and also the temperature of the room has risen as well. So therefore, the flow of the sound will not sound as crisp to the people at the back of the room, to the engineers. So these are kind of things you just have to, an A1 will generally know this kind of stuff, and they will kind of tweak the audio as the show starts. And this is why sometimes it's good to have like a moderator come on first and speak into the microphones. And so you can actually do a quick check with the moderator, introduce the 2 people, they come in, so you can actually kind of get the room to the right level. So when your 2 talents sit down for a podcast in front of an audience, everything's right to go. But the energy level, if you do have roadies coming in and sitting in for them doing a mic check, that will just be good for signal, but it won't be good for volumes for the actual talent. So again, an A1 will need to ride those faders, for gain and volume for each person in real time. And they're usually quite good at this. This is usually one of the first things you learn, like an A2, you kind of learn that. So it's not a big problem. It's just you need to have mindful audio staff for those kind of events to make sure they run smoothly.
Tucker?
Yeah, I mean, what Carl said was absolutely spot on. I mean, it really, like, for me, when I'm doing audio is where I came from. I've moved over to the video side, but I still do some concert work and some work in that realm. And my biggest thing, I call it the warm hug, is it's just when you get them in, get them comfortably in the spot, explain to them, hey, the quieter you are, the more I have to work the mic up, the more likely it is that we have feedback. And that's it. Like, there's just like a little quick explanation at the beginning. And then from there, like, if it's a band or, something, I don't want to have them do the normal sound check of like kick, thump, 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 and go through that. Same thing. I'm not going to ask them to count. I'm going to say, hey, hop up there, just start playing, go ahead and rehearse, do your thing. And I want to let them know that, one, they're in good hands, they're safe. Two, just have fun, do your thing. I'll just know I'm going to be making adjustments while you're doing this. And same thing with an interview. If it's a panel discussion, I do the same thing where you go up and say, hey, heads up, can you all just talk shop? Talk a little bit about what you're going to be talking about. Make sure you're kind of handing the conversation off. You're going to hear us doing some work out front, bringing the levels up. You'll start to hear that in the room. If you have any questions, let me know during the process, and just get them comfortable. Because the more comfortable they are, the more likely they're going to get to that consistent place. Because you can have people overspeak and give you really good signal. It's almost the worst thing is if they give you really good signal in rehearsal, then they get in front of 1,500 people in the room and they get shy all of a sudden and they start getting real soft. You just have to get them comfortable. So that's my thing.
Yeah, that's good, Guy.
Yeah, knowing the tools as well, like what microphone, like this head-worn microphone with a high SPL versus a lavalier versus a handheld versus a large diaphragm condenser. Like, what microphones do you have access to? Because some of these will be like a lavalier that's a cardioid, and if they choose different attire to wear during the actual show, and that thing rotates, all of a sudden you've just lost half their SPL, and you're like, what just happened? So what are you going to do then? So being able to know your tools, know the rhythm of the show, but then for the actual checks, I mean, Mickey will probably know this one, is you just ask them what they had for breakfast this morning. They'll tell you, and then say, hey, can I get that in your excited voice? And, kind of joke around with them, and usually they'll laugh too, and they'll amp it up just a little bit. And you get your gain in the ballpark. But then, like Carl said, you're bouncing around on those faders as the VUs bounce around. I mean, that's your A1's job.
Yeah, Alex.
One of the things that I think that is often undervalued is the value of rehearsal for the tech crew. So a lot of times you get talent who say, I don't need to rehearse, but we need you to rehearse. We need you to rehearse because we're trying to figure out where you're going to be on the stage and how loud are you going to talk and what are you going to do and how quickly how are you going to click the clicker? Like, are you going to do it when you want it or a little before, or like, there's all these things about the crew organizing themselves around each speaker that is really, really important. And I think, and again, for volume, for a virtual event or a real event or whatever, when people go through a basic idea of what they're going to do, they may not be perfect, but they're going to be a lot closer. The closer they get to the real thing, the closer they're going to get to the real volume and the real piece. Now, what I tend to do is, if I have, it depends on what control I have over it. I'm a little bit more careful if they're online, if they're on the other side of something. When they're in the space, I tend to run a little hot, and they have a limiter on them. They have a compressor and a limiter and a kind of a brick wall compressor at the top, and then a limiter on the other side of that. And I let it flatten out against it. Like, I get as close as I think I'm going to be, but I go on the heavier end, because the worst thing is people are like, I can't hear you, And so, and if you have a good limiter, analog limiter, like something that's a solid limiter that's going to sound good, all they're going to do is flatten out a little bit when they hit it, and they're just going to kind of flatten out, and then you'll correct it within, again, this gets back into writing the faders. You'll have it corrected in the first 20 words. But what you're not going to have is someone yelling out. I find that the thing that people very rarely complain that the person's too loud. What happens is someone in the back of the room or something, if you don't handle that really quickly, it's like, I can't hear what's going on. And so, and if you have it at a reasonable level, like if it hits the limiter, it's still going to not be killing everybody, like you have to test that. But usually if you run just a little heavy, a solid limiter, just kind of protecting the equipment or protecting you from over modulating, and then just pull it into a place that makes more sense. With a good A1, that's 15 seconds. That's the first 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds as they do it. It'll get within a reasonable level in a couple words. And then the first minute or two, you'll see the A1 kind of settling into where they're going to be. And that comes back to just having great A1s doing, the A1 and the TD and the A1 TD show caller, like super power, like these are the people that you need to be 1,000 shows under their belt, if you're doing anything major.
So true. Mickey said a great point here. Many attempt to get the broadcast loudness right from the head amp. No. Manage your gain staging and dynamics control as their signal goes through your processing chain. I really like that because ultimately you can then establish a good quality sound first and have that all working well, and all of the dynamic control is managed per channel. And then at the end is when you're able to go, okay, now it needs another 6 dB, and now it needs another, limiter or whatever it needs. There's a couple of things. Version 3 of the DM3, the Yamaha DM3 firmware was recently released, and was and now has auto mix included, 8 channels of auto mix, which is really nice, right? And auto mix doesn't solve this problem, right? But what it does do is it helps, I think, to actually get a higher gain output, because you're able to manage the noise and the potential gain of those other open mics for a panel discussion. So you still need to do all the processing of going through each mic and putting in the dynamics control on each one, and I do that, and then I have auto mix that just kind of manages it a little bit, 3 of 6 dB here and there. So nice for a panel discussion. Tucker, you got something else?
Yeah, and do your homework. Do your homework on who your talent is, and if you have, females that will be speaking, make sure you use females to speak during a check with your audio engineers. So go through and make sure, like, we know which C-level executives we're going to be working with at every show, and we know their tendencies. And so going through and saying, okay, hey, you're going to pretend to be John right now. And so get someone that has a similar voice and can do that. Because by the time they get up there, you need to get level and EQ, but everything else should already be stable. You shouldn't be putting them through the feedback levels and all that stuff.
Alex?
Another great point that Tucker made there that I just want to underline is how important it is to have stand-ins for what you're doing. And I don't get other people from the crew to come up and do it because they feel uncomfortable or whatever. I hire local actors. They're happy to do it. You can find people that'll cue them in. It's not expensive, to have a local actor that's in local stage stuff and everything else. They love to come up there and do something. The ones that are the best are the ones that do improv or comedians, because they can think on their feet and they entertain the crew. But they'll get up there and do what they need to do. But a lot of times, I think I've talked about this in the past, but we try to match the height, match the complexion, match the gender, match everything for the person that we're going to have up there to get as close as we can. We'll give it to a casting agency and say, this is what we're looking for, and they'll give us 5 people or 6 people that are those people. And we only have them up there for a couple hours while we're doing stuff. But what it means is that even if you're going to do rehearsal, when your VIP walks in, everything's dialed in. Like, we have situations where I've got 6 actors walking on and I've got a moderator. I get the moderator maybe an hour before the show, and I don't get the actors until they show up. Like, they're just going to walk on. And so what we do is we do all the technical rehearsals with the stand-ins. We get to a point where the stand-ins can do it in their sleep. We then add the moderator. Everybody knows the game except for the moderator. The moderator comes up to speed quickly because everyone else is doing the right thing and they just know what they need to do. And then when the actors come on, everybody's got it figured out. And so, but that kind of previs makes everything work, especially at a high level.
Yeah, I'll give you just another take, which is a different way of doing the audio, or a different context, and that is that I mix an a cappella band at 5 voices a cappella band and have done 130 shows or something around the world. And my process is that I go into a new room, and this is a very common process, is to listen to some songs that I know really well, and that gets me familiar with the system. And then I do a tune of the system, and I use the mics and I ring them out and I do all that, and then I do a virtual sound check. So then I've got often the recording from the night before or the previous show in multi-track record, and so now I can play that back, and I can solo tracks, and I can do all of that, and I can listen to how the band is going to sound, probably within 95% accuracy, as in there's no acoustic sounds coming off the stage, but there isn't much with 5 voices. And then by the time they come on the stage, I'm 95% sound checked. I'm happy. And so then the purpose of the sound check is for them and to make them really comfortable. And so now I'm doing things that I'm not making them jump through hoops, like, you know, often sound guys can be like, I want you to do this, and now you do this, and now you sing, and then now you sing, no, you stop, and you know, and that just makes it uncomfortable. Whereas I'm like, I've already done all of that. So now, how do you feel on stage? You know, can we move the side feel, and can we move that around? How can we make you more comfortable? And then I get the idea, because this is the other thing, is that as Carl was talking about, in a sound check environment, those guys are often preserving their voices, right? So they're trying to give a good sound check, but they're probably doing 60-70% of what their performance level will be. And so I know that as well. And so then when they come out and there's the energy and you know, the applause and all this stuff's going on, I know that that level is going to be different, and I'm driving it. And so that's the other thing, is that and some people might do this differently, but I'm often riding either the master or the DCA, depending on how I'm doing it, but probably a DCA. I'm riding the DCA the whole time, the whole show. And so I'm doing a mix, I'm doing my sub mix of those 5, you know, plus effects, those 5 inputs. But then I'm just riding that DCA because I'm happy with the mix, but it needs an extra 3 dB, or, you know, it's a little bit hot, and I just pull it back a little bit. So there's just those things of the dynamics of the operator at the time, and where you're sitting. And I only use an iPad now. It doesn't matter what board is in the venue. I do everything on my iPad, and I walk around with it. During the show, I'm normally sitting in the audience, and so I just get a blocked seat, and they're like, do you need like 6 seats blocked? I'm like, no, just one. One's fine. I can just sit with the iPad, and away I go. It's awesome. Tucker,
there is.
Dad.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, what you just said is one of the things that I have to remind crews when I'm working with new groups, when I come in as a freelancer and I'm, you know, at a level where it's appropriate, but is to remind the crews whenever it's like, hey, rehearsal's coming up. This is for a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 or, you know, whoever it is. And you're like, hey, this is a reminder to you as the crew. This rehearsal is not for you. This rehearsal is for the talent. And so that's the whole point of having stand-ins come in and getting to that 95% before. So all you're doing is a little level adjustment, little EQ adjustment, because that rehearsal, again, it is for the talent to get comfortable on stage. You know, if you get something out of it, awesome. But this is for them to be comfortable.
Yep, totally agree.
Another thing, there is this thing, I don't know what you want to call it, but I always called it the Hello St. Louis. So what will happen is, it doesn't matter if it's a rock band or a podcast, they'll come out on stage and there'll be people clapping and cheering that they're coming out on stage. And they'll say, hello, St. Louis, you know, if they're in St. Louis, of course, you know. Or just come out and say, hello, St. Louis, and they get the joke from The Simpsons, but I won't go into that. They'll just come out and say that, and they'll always say it loud because they're gonna speak over the cheers and over the clapping, so they'll actually be much louder than what their normal talking voice is. So if you have their microphone ready for normal talking and the audience is quiet, and they come out and do a hello, St. Louis, it's going to be really loud. You make it, you know, it's going to be bad. So do be mindful of that. So either have a limiter, like what Alex was saying, have this brick wall limiter, especially like even if it's just a momentary, you put your finger on this brick wall limiter when they come out and say, hello, St. Louis. And then you can go back to normal show where you have compression and limiter way up on the top. But do be mindful of people who are excited coming out to, cheers and clapping. They will yell into the microphone because they want to hear themselves saying those words, and they may just not be in the fold back region yet or whatever you got going on. So do be mindful of that. That people will come out, and that's usually the first sign of feedback, is they'll come out and yell into the microphone and say hello to the crowd because they're excited and what the crowd, they're enjoying the fact the crowd's responding to them. But you, as an A1 or as anyone who's in charge of that audio, have that limiter kind of set probably a little bit lower, a little bit more aggressive for the first 5 seconds when they come out, and once they sit down and the crowd goes silent, go back to what you would have had set up during your mic check.
Nice. Alex had a last thought.
So many thoughts. All I was going to say is that I'll make a couple notes that from great morsels here to talk about. But one is what Tucker was talking about is that it's such a confidence game. People feeling confident about that everything's working. So when we have VIPs come in, I tell everyone this is a confidence game. When they walk in, everything has to feel like we are under control, that everything's under control, that this is there. We have everything ready for them. When we build their green room, it's telling them that we're under control. When we send someone over to bring them in, it's telling them we have everything under control. When everything works, it's telling them everything's under control. And that allows them to be present, because everything about what we do is to allow our talent to be present. That's, just to be present in what they're doing. And if they're worried about anything, they're not present, and they're not going to put on the same performance that they would otherwise. As far as yelling, one thing that I learned, working with someone on live, is how important in-ears are. Now, it depends on whether they have foldbacks or not, but in-ears just drive it drives the behavior. When it's done well, the artist will be very, good at what they're doing because they can hear themselves clearly. When they can't hear themselves clearly, they don't hear the right instruments the way they want them to. And the luxury that we've had on some of the higher end events is we have a person dedicated to only their in-ears. So there's a person there that just is sitting there by stage, and they get used to it. First they look in the back and, hey, can you bring up the guitar or bring my voice up or whatever? And then when they realize there's a person sitting on stage that'll do that, they'll just, okay, there's like this whispering, can you just turn that? And when they know that they can just noodle with it, they just love getting it just the way they want it. Again, allowing them to be present and allow them to be, kind of connected to that. And the last thing I was going to say is that, when we do surround work, a lot of times the bands will come in a week before and they record the whole set, the week before. And then that gives the surround team time to build all of the beds and all the things they might want to do with the objects and, everything else. And especially if the band's playing with any accompaniment and a click track or one or the other, it really means they're going to be right where they think they are. And then they start building automation into it. And then so you can really kind of expand, what the value of that is based on the fact that you've got that there in front of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like to tell the people I'm working with that you have unlimited changes. You can change as many times as you want. And the worst thing, the failure for me, is hearing that at the end of the show, you were uncomfortable with the sound on stage or in your ears, and you just didn't want to say anything because you felt like you'd asked or too many times. But you're not letting me do my job. Like that's what I
can only make you as happy as you tell me to make you. If you stop telling me, I can no longer make you happier.
Make you happy. That's good. Yeah.
And for those of you, exactly. Like the inside thing, if someone's singing and they go and you see them go like this.
Yeah.
Like that, that's like you screwed it up. There's something wrong with my in-ear, especially when they rip it out with like verve. That's them telling the engineer that you screwed that up. So
exactly. That was a good question, Zach. You got us all. You had the right panel as well to chat about it. So well done. All right, we've got to the end, and now we're just doing some content recommendations. So we're going to swing around the panel and think of a particular album or video, movie, something, whatever. And just to give some of the panelists a moment to think about it, I'll go first in case they'd forgotten. So whenever the Oscar nominations come out, I do try to. So here's the preface: is that I actually enjoy watching award shows. Like I just enjoy it. I thought that the Golden Globes were really cool, and we talked about it before. But that side camera, the side shot that they had with audience in the back, I thought was super cool. And the camera that was on the pedestal that spun right around the stage was very cool. Anyway, I enjoy award shows, and so I enjoy the Oscars. And one way to enjoy it even more is to have seen the movies. Like, to have seen the bulk of the movies actually helps me enjoy it more. And so for quite a few years now, I've tried to watch at least every Best Picture. And so I just saw Conclave, and it's really good. I really enjoyed it. So I would recommend that. It was about replacing the Pope, and a fictitious story, but really nicely shot, and the audio is really good. Now perhaps you shouldn't notice it, but I did notice it. I noticed the Foley on it. I noticed the bottom end of the voices was just really present. Sounded amazing. And so anyway, Conclave, it's worth a look. All right, Alex, what's yours?
By the way, one of the things, if I really love a movie, is a lot of times I'll watch it a second time, but not watch it. I'll literally sit on my couch and just close my eyes and just lean back and just listen. I have a pretty good surround system at home, so I can just kind of hear what they did and everything else. And while I complain a lot about the dialogue for Christopher Nolan films, if you close your eyes and listen to a Christopher Nolan film, it's pretty amazing. Like, just the atmosphere that's built. You just can't understand what anyone's saying. As far as content goes, this has come up again. I may have said it before. When if you're building educational content, I don't think I talked about this last week, because I think the conversation came up again recently, but the greatest education videos ever made were connections. Did I talk about that last week? Was that what I said last week?
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't. No. Okay.
But I've said it in the past. You normally squeeze in a couple of content recommendations in the
But I'm only squeezing in one today. But I will say, you can find the first 4 episodes on YouTube for the season 1. This was the biggest risk that PBS and BBC had ever taken in their fledgling years. Like, BBC had been around for a while. PBS was only 5 or 6 years old, and they just dumped all their money into this writer that had written this book called Connections, and James Burke. And to this day, like, every time I go back and look at it, I'm just like, yeah, nothing's as good as what he did there. And it was a mixture of, I mean, it looks goofy because it's 70s, and he's got long, kind of balding but long hair, and he's got like a funny suit on and everything else. He obviously knows it. They created these environments that he's walking through. They're doing all this. It's a magical thing, and I'm trying to figure out a way that we can get a hold of James Burke to have him come on, or have us interview him or something, because he still, and I've seen stuff he doesn't, to build on this a little bit on so I did squeeze in a second one. The original one is the best one, but he does a Curiosity Stream now. If you go to Curiosity Stream, he has, and I subscribe to Curiosity Stream just to watch them. They're not as good. They don't have the same budget. It's a lot of green screen, but it's still James Burke and he's just he's a treasure, to watch, because it's so amazingly, it shows you so much about how story can create it. It's can create you understanding why things are important and why they're not, or why things are important mostly. Anyway, so if you haven't seen Connections, it's required reading. If you do anything around education or anything else, you should just watch Connections 1. If you have to buy it, go buy it. If you can watch the first 4.
It's on archive.org.
Yeah, and I think those ones are the same quality as the ones that are on YouTube. Right. Watching those low resolution versions on at home, airplayed from my computer to my TV, my kids would not let you at 10 and 12 would not let you talk in the room while they're watching. Like, that's a 50-year-old badly compressed version of something, and they were just raptured. Like, to like, they're just sitting there watching the whole thing, and that's something else. And when I talked to, I've told this story before, but when I was going back and forth on Twitter with Alton Brown about connections, and he said that he basically just watched all the connections before he designed Good Eats. So Good Eats is just connections applied to food. And so if you're thinking, well, I really like Good Eats, yeah, that's why. so I would highly recommend it. It comes up every once in a while, every year or so, that I'm like, I got to tell people again, if they haven't seen it, they need to watch all 10 episodes, and then come back and there'll be a test.
So that's the thing. It says 10 episodes, but then
there's
on
3 seasons.
archive.org.
There's 3 seasons.
Yeah, so he did 2 seasons essentially back to back in the 70s, as Alex was saying. I think maybe one was the early 80s, and then season 3 was done in the 90s when he did another series, a shorter series called Things That The Day the Universe Changed.
Yeah,
he's done lots of series because essentially the BBC and PBS just throw him money, say, look, we got this budget, what can you do?
Can you do it again?
Yeah, and so he did a one-off. He did a 2-off. What will the future be in the early 90s?
Yeah.
So he did. That was an amazing one. That was just a 2 episodes.
And he nailed it, by the way.
Yeah.
He nailed the future.
That made the news. So when that went to air, just as like a program, the next day there was actually a news story about that program and people's reaction to the future, because he got futuristic. It was quite amazing. But anything with James Burke is great.
He's worked on this thing called K-Web forever, and I ended up in a conversation with him maybe 15 years ago about K-Web and how we might be able to help him do stuff and everything else. When I look back at the clock, it was a 2-hour conversation. I talked to him for 2 hours, and it was like a moment. It was so his voice and the discussion and his excitement about it and everything else, that it happened so quickly, and it's just it was there and then gone. But I suddenly realized, looking at the clock, I had been talking to him for 2 hours, and he's just a really magical individual, and hopefully we'll get to interview him, before it's too late, because he's just really got an immense amount of ability to teach.
He's 88, so we've got to get onto it.
Working on it. He's still out there doing stuff, though. He's 88 years old. Let me tell you another story. So we gotta we've got another year or two, but at least. So working on it.
Nice. Guy, what have you got?
Yeah, I kind of went down the rabbit hole after speaking with the CIC on a production that I was working on a couple weeks ago. I had never heard of these guys. The name of the company is Funicular Goats, which I don't know, Alex, have you heard of these guys, Funicular Goats?
No, I have not.
No, they do Super Bowl halftime show. They did Taylor Swift's Eras tour. So on the shoot that I was on, we had these 25 to 1,000 Fujinon Duvos hooked up to an Alexa, and during this production, the guys explaining the multi-dyne and how it goes into the ROS, and how he wanted to get an Ultrex. And I was just like, man, where can I learn more about this stuff? He's like, dude, check out their Instagram. So I was looking at this Instagram with, it's called Behind the Broadcast. So I'll put a link to it in the chat, but Behind the Broadcast and Funicular Goats. And in this one, they actually showed the behind the scene, how this Agito comes up following the cable cam during the Super Bowl halftime show. It's just really cool to see this kind of stuff behind the scenes, because you're like, how did they get that shot? And then you see this and you're like, oh my gosh. So my content pick would be Behind the Broadcast and Funicular Goats Instagrams, and I'll put a link to both those, because it's really cool to learn what they're using at the biggest events in the world.
Sorry, you made me get Instagram out. That was a mistake. All right. Carl, what have you got?
So I'm going for one. This is it's a historical series, so technically it's fictionalized. It's called Operation Buffalo. So it's a 6-part limited series, so they're about an hour each, so 6 hours total. That's the whole story. It was made here in Australia, so it's about the nuclear testing, but it's not really about the nuclear testing, if you know what I mean. It's a story set around the nuclear testing that was happening here in Australia in the 1950s. But it's a fantastic story. There's a lot of, so I would say that the set is accurate to like the millimeter. So they were quite accurate to the millimeter of creating the set. So when you see the sets in this and the location, it is almost scarily accurate. The story, of course, is fictionalized or dramatized, but it's a kind of a mixture of an interesting kind of thriller, comedy. It's a bit of everything. So it's a really great story. I think this is perfect 6 hours. If you want to know how to tell a story in 6 hours, this is one of the best, and this is one of the best that's come out of Australia in the last few years. This was released during COVID, So it was released, I believe, 2020 or 2021. So it hit the airwaves during COVID. You can pretty much get to it with a VPN if you just go to iView here in Australia, but you'll find it elsewhere as well. But yeah, so Operation Buffalo, 6 hours, 6 episodes, fictionalized story set in a real setting of a real event that happened. It'd be very interesting. There's a lot of political intrigue in this as well, but it's I would call it, it's not too heavy. There is a little bit of comedy in it, but there's also a little bit of drama, a little bit of thriller as well.
Jessica DeGao looks a lot like Parker Posey. I was looking at pictures of her. I was like,
we have a very deep cast in this as well.
And then what? Sorry, is that
very, very, very deep cast in this as well. So it's
Right.
really high, like there's Academy Award winners in this as well. So there's a pretty deep cast in this, very large cast as well. But yes, for 6 episodes, if you just want like a palate cleanser from whatever you're watching, this is a great one. Yeah.
Nice
I
one.
was like, oh, Parker Posey's in it. Then I was like, no, it's not.
No.
It's not. Yeah, so
All right, Paul, we're going to get yours, but it can't be Landman again.
It's
All right?
it's not going to be
How much you like
Landman
it.
again. I finished Landman.
Okay.
I finished it. It's over. But I am looking
I have started
forward.
it now, though. I can see why
I
you
am
liked
looking
it.
for. I am looking forward to 2 more in that by the same director, producer, writer. There's going to be 1923 and 1944. Those are the 2 series coming up, and I think one of them is next month. And but what I've been watching lately is something called Ripley, and Ripley's really good cinematography. It's black and white. It's about a grifter who goes overseas, and there's stunning scenes architecturally of this building that he goes up and down the stairs, and it's just phenomenal cinematography. So I've watched a couple episodes, and I also, since Alex got me excited about Silo, I've also started watching that. I'm into episode 2 of that. So that's my pick, Ripley.
Well
It's
done.
really good.
Very good. Tucker, finish us off.
All right. After hearing people talk about Silo, I'm definitely going to go take a look. And
good.
I am way in the kind of engineering mindset lately, and I've strangely been really enjoying the things Elias and Jonas have both been writing on LinkedIn lately are really like, I'm with Jonas all the time, but it's rare for us to sit down and him to be like, here's a long form explanation of the thing I'm working on, because we're working very fast on lots of projects. And so it's really nice to go through and read his LinkedIn stuff and be like, oh, that's the deep part of what you told me the other day. It's
Good
cool.
one. We've been talking about everyone needs a Jonas. And so now you just got to look at his LinkedIn posts and you'll learn a bunch. That's great. Thanks, everyone. I thought we were going to be early and we ended up running late. I want to thank the team behind the scenes making it all happen, and the fact that we ran late. Alan, Peter, Robert and Taylor for making that all work, and for the panel and for the great questions we had tonight as well. Join us tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Pacific, and every day, 7 a.m. Pacific for office hours, and go to officehours.global to find out more. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.